Good morning, everybody, and welcome to SURF's People in Place Network. My name is Ewan Leach. I'm the Chief Executive of SURF, and thank you for joining us this morning. Just a pre-Easter seminar. No doubt people are looking forward to a long weekend if you have the Friday and Monday off. Hopefully the weather will pick up. I'm supposed to be taking some visitors to Loch Catrin this weekend, maybe for a cycle. I'm hoping that it's at least dry, and maybe for a go on the steamship as well. The purpose of today's network, as always, is to look at how public policy works actually in practice, and how it works in practice both for practitioners, but for communities and for people working within local authorities as well. And today we have a great example of that as we're looking at green infrastructure master planning. We're looking at it almost in one place. Normally we are have a range of speakers, or two speakers looking at two different places at different levels, but we're today looking kind of at one place within Fife, but at a number of levels within Fife, from a consultant's perspective, from the client, the local authority's perspective, from an architect's perspective, and from the community perspective as to how the green infrastructure approach has worked in a couple of settlements within Fife. So this morning we'll be hearing from Leanne Bauer from UrbanPioneers, from Kevin O'Kane from Fife Council, and then Calum Duncan from Calum Duncan Architects. And then we'll have a Q&A. After that, we'll have a comfort break, and then we'll hear from Lisa Murray from the Touch Community Garden, who'll be giving us a community perspective of what they've been doing there. So I think that's all I have to say. We're recording this morning's meeting. It'll be uploaded later, and the slides will be shared as well after today's event. So what we're hoping from today is that there'll be some learning from what's happening in Fife. It allows you to copy what's happening in Fife if you think it's a good idea, and it also offers an opportunity to ask our four speakers maybe some difficult questions as to how things really worked, or what the challenges were. We're interested in, if there are challenges around delivering public policy, how do we remove some of the barriers to delivering things that communities are wanting to happen in their places. So have your questions in mind. You can use the chat. It's always really nice to hear from people. So when we come to the Q&A, if you want to put your hand up, then please do, and you can unmute and ask our panel any questions that you have about the presentations that they've given. So we will, without any further ado, I will now hand over to Leanne, who is from UrbanPioneers, and going to share her presentation on their approach to the Green Infrastructure Master Plan. Leanne, over to you.
Hello. Hello, so I'm Leanne Bauer. I'm a landscape architect, and I have worked with everyone here on the panel on various projects. Kevin is my client for two of the projects that I will be introducing today. One is in Dunfermline in Fife, the other one is in Kirkcaldy. In Fife, I'm the landscape architect on that project. Both projects are very different in what we were trying to achieve. Both of them are green infrastructure master plans, but both of them have a very different focus and a very different context. So I will briefly go into that as I go through the two different projects. But I thought I would start off in first just briefly speaking about what green infrastructure actually is. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, and it's in the right mode.
It's in slide mode, yes.
Yes, super. I can hardly see it. I see all of the faces in between. Okay, so what is green infrastructure? There's a lot of definitions out there about what green infrastructure really is. My definition of green infrastructure is it's very simple. It's a green network, and the more we can connect individual green spaces, the better for nature, and also whatever is good for nature is also good for humans, I feel. And humans benefit from that. Oops, I can't. Oops, oh yeah, okay. So I have a couple, let me just double check how I can move my slides forward. Okay, and how do I get back? I can't. Okay, that's the best way to do it. Okay, so this is the official, more official definition of green infrastructure. Green infrastructure should always be something, a network that provides the ingredients for solving urban and climatic challenges by building with nature. I think as soon as we connect individual green spaces, that will always happen. But there's of course also more technical challenges like stormwater management, climate adaptation, which for us as landscape architects quite often include choosing the right tree species, and sometimes they are native, but sometimes they're not native. In Germany, so I'm also German, there's a lot of discussion about whether we have a lot of heat at the moment in our cities, and our native trees can hardly cope with the increased heat. And we are introducing new species from the Balkans to kind of like get the ecosystem adjusted to a warmer climate. But that means that we don't always just use native species. So there's an enormous discussion about should it be native, should it not be native. Reduction of heat stress, of course, increasing biodiversity, very, very important. It seems like a tiny little thing, but it's so important to get our pollinators spaces out there to just make sure that we have food security in future. Fruit production, better air quality, sustainable energy production, it all kind of like ties in. All of that can be delivered by green infrastructure. And as you can see on the bottom, I have a couple of like pictures in here. This is a picture of like it's just a typology of a large city and how we could green up this large city and how we can build green networks by obviously using roofs, using parks, having sots underground in the streets for the trees, greening up facades. This is a park here that also has solar panels in it, so we can also multi-use some of the spaces. And this is one of my favorite pictures because sometimes green infrastructure is already here and we can just tap into what our cities already provide us with. Oops. Next slide. This is an image that shows that whatever we do with green infrastructure also really helps humans, and green infrastructure spaces can be really small spaces. Everything really helps. So like a little small corner on the street, which teams with biodiversity or small spaces for bees and beetles and so on, obviously do help with biodiversity. Small railways, which start to populate with sedum. I mean, sedum is not the most biodiverse plant, but it still helps with heat stress. It helps with cooling cities. It helps with water retention, and it still provides a nice space for children to play. Playgrounds can be much better than what we currently design at the moment. They can also be biodiverse spaces. They don't have to be just the playground that we know. I have a couple of images from beyond Fife. This is a place in Karlsruhe in Germany, and it just shows that green infrastructure also builds up over generations. We obviously have our place to play, but we can also tap into green infrastructure that has already been built by generations before us. So this here is the palace in Karlsruhe, and that is a royal forest that they used to have in Karlsruhe. And Karlsruhe is one of the greenest cities in Germany. But even here we had the Rhine River, we have the mountains over here, and we have the royal palace in the center with the woodlands to both sides. But there were missing links connecting all of those already green infrastructure corridors. So Karlsruhe has really focused now on doing an analysis of what green spaces they have, and then seeing what they need to focus on over the next 20 years to make sure that all of those green spaces are well connected with each other. Next image is of this next slide shows that green infrastructure doesn't just go beyond cities or within cities, but also goes beyond cities. So that is, of course, that is the Iron Curtain. That is the German Wall, which came down 30 years ago. I'm literally here at the moment. This is where I grew up, right on the Iron Curtain. And that was obviously, the wall has now been demolished. This is what it looked like just after the wall came down and the wall was demolished. Of course, the wall itself was over 50 meters wide with the wall and then various fences. And all of that has now been used to create a green corridor through Germany and has since then now been extended through Europe. So it now goes right down to the Balkans, but it also continues up through Scandinavia. So it's now an inter-European green network, and we have an amazing amount of species that use that network now, but also you can see we have active travel connecting into those into that green fringe. Oops, next slide. But of course, we have the same in Scotland. So we have a lot of areas which we can utilize. This is the area where I live in Edinburgh. That is North Edinburgh. And we have those wonderful old railway lines. And I live right on that star railway line here. And it's really nice because it's underneath the road system. So I can avoid all of the big roads and I can get into all places in Edinburgh just using the cycle network and the green network that I have right in front of my door. This here is Glasgow. And this is, of course, an area in the Gorbals. And birches have recolonized some of the railway tracks. Of course, in New York, they use that to build a High Line. I think it's even useful if you don't do anything. I mean, it's obviously great to have like an active travel network on that, but it's also just great for wildlife, even if nothing happens with it. It's just a wonderful network to use, I think. Okay, first project is Lynburn Corridor in Dunfermline, and Kevin will also talk about this later on, as will Lisa from our community. This is one of our favorite projects in the office. It's just been a joy to work on that. It's been going on for several years. And this year is Dunfermline. Dunfermline Town Centre is over here. And beyond the red line, you can see the eastern expansion of Dunfermline. When I first moved to Scotland 15 or 16 years ago, there was a little bit of development in that area, but it wasn't anything like it is now. So it has massively grown over the last couple of years. But there's actually already an existing green corridor almost linking the town centre with that new expansion over here. And it's two parks, Rex Park and Whitmill Park, which have always been green spaces, but they're really underutilized. When we first started working in that area, it was a really underutilized green. It's a green lung. It's very central, but people just didn't go into it particularly often or didn't enjoy going through it. This here is Tuch, the area that Lisa will speak about later on, and Kevin will probably touch on that as well. So as designers, we obviously like to have a strategic overview and add like what's happening? And add a strategic level to the design and to the approach to draw more activity into the park. We looked at different levels of the park. We looked at the social offers that the park has and play, but also in terms of like just seating areas, active travel provisions. How easy is it to move through the park? Is it safe to move through the park? That meant a complete review of the past network. Tree planting, really important, not just for biodiversity, actually. Also, the park, when we first had a look at it, felt to us really flat, and it didn't have a lot of like vertical structure. But it was also quite difficult to recognize entrances and where the pathways would lead. So the trees that we proposed are in very strategic positions. They act as wayfinding, but they also act as frames. And then, of course, long grass and wildflowers, both for biodiversity, but also for maintenance, of course, because maintenance is always an issue with all local authorities, and resources are tight everywhere. So now I just have a couple of images actually to show Lynburn Park and also some of the changes. That is a bird that goes through the corridor. when we came onto the project, that was already, this used to be a canalized burn, and that was already in progress, that kind of like naturalization of the burn and its flow, and it's just made such a difference. It obviously helps with water retention during storm events. It flows down the flow rate, it slows down the flow rate of the river, of course, and it's just much more beautiful to walk along it now, and it helps with biodiversity. It's a no-brainer almost to renaturalize our water courses. These are some of the trees that we planted. So that is in an area where we felt we needed a vertical structure. And we also, the tree species are specifically chosen to reinforce that vertical structure, but also we have specific tree species on entrances, and then we have specific tree species throughout the park. So it helps with wayfinding as well. We have benches, much more benches, very simple things to do. Installing, they're really robust and hopefully vandal proof. That was one of the key criteria that we looked at, was making sure that benches are robust, but also that they have backrests and armrests to make them more accessible. Small areas of play and seating areas located at very specific points, sometimes at entrances, sometimes halfway through the park, to kind of like break down the journey. Markers that you have now entered Lindburn corridor, but then also we tried to get local businesses and local support and buy-in from surrounding areas. And wherever we got donations for tree planting, we acknowledge that with a little sign. This is not particularly sharp, that image. This is Tuf Community Garden. So this is the area that Lisa will talk much more about it. That is one specific area along that corridor, which has been great fun to work on and develop, and which has been really successful over the last couple of years. And it's one element in the wider corridor. This is our growing beds, which were installed last year and have already been filled up with some food growing. Meadows, of course. So we have wherever we felt it was appropriate. We have meadows, but we also have long grass in different areas. So meadows, of course, are a little bit more intense in terms of maintenance than long grass is. This is the area just right next to the community garden, and it's in the entrance area to Tush. So it was really important to get a lot of like flower and burst and color into that area. But we also have apple trees, and we got some apples on our very first year. And then we started a tree adoption certificate again to get more local buy-in, and also to make sure that people feel a little bit responsible for their trees. That is an idea that we have stolen from London, where they have street trees and they have local residents adopting those trees to make sure that they're watered in summer. That isn't quite needed in Dunfermline. Oops, that's not really needed in Dunfermline, but having a tree adopted and then you get your name tag on your tree is just a nice idea to have like a connection to the local park in front of your house. My second project, and I will touch on that just really quickly because I'm aware my time is almost over, but Calum will go into that project in much more detail. So this is a project where we got Calum Duncan architects involved. It's another master plan in Kirkcaldy. And the challenges were quite different. We didn't have the green network yet that we did have in Lindburn, where we just needed to improve the quality of the existing green space. Here we still have to create a green network. But also the area that we were looking at in Pass Head is an area of industrial heritage. There's huge industrial sites in that area, and green infrastructure doesn't necessarily mean no buildings. In that area, it's actually really important that we get new housing and new buildings and get architecture and landscape architecture work together, will also benefit the green infrastructure. So it's not always one or the other, it can also work together. Kirkcaldy is really already pretty green. It's just that our area isn't, well, that's not totally true. Our area also has some green spaces in it, but it's not well connected to other green spaces around it. That is a wider green infrastructure plan that Kirkcaldy had already done. There's a lot of like green infrastructure work to be done up here. Our site is in here, and these two corridors, these two missing links were identified here on that project. This is a quick diagram that shows that the red area really indicates, well, it's not really houses, but it's like areas which don't have enough green space. So if we were to install homes in those red areas, they would have a lack of green space because the green space is not accessible. And that is quite surprising sometimes, because here we do have a massive green space, but right next to it, we still have homes which would not have access to green space. Same over here. And the reason for that is that we have barriers into that green space. So we had a look at why is that, and what you can see, everything that is orange here is a fence, and the black dots are the gates. So from this side here, you just cannot get into that park. But if you could just add one gate, you could actually improve the access to the green space for an enormous amount of people. So sometimes it's not even about creating new green spaces. Sometimes it's just about reviewing what you have and why it's not accessible to other people. We also have two railway line. Well, we have this big railway line crossing our side, which disconnects the two halves of the site, and we have two major roads going through the site as well. So this was our master plan, quick sketch of our master plan, reinforcing the green connections that we already have, by just opening gates up and making sure the fences are permeable. There's also an entire new green site in here. This is an old woodland. It's beneath the wood. It's beneath the railway line, and it's just completely fenced at the moment. It's not particularly accessible. It's quite steep as well, but it has great potential. But at the moment, nobody can go in. Teenagers go in there to just hang out. But if we could open that green space here, it just opens up an entire new potential for green networks. That was our sketch master plan. And you can see how green it becomes really quickly as soon as you just kind of like address small items. What you can see, oh, maybe back to this one. What you can see here as well, we identified two new housing sites. The first one is the Nairn site here, and I think Calum will talk more about this one here. And then there's a second smaller site, which is Den Road site here. But of course, developing this as housing still means that we need to have some green space in there as well, because we also still need horizontal links to connect those two green corridors coming down. This was a quick study for just investigating how much houses we could fit on the individual development plots that we had, that are either identified by Fife Council on the development plan, or which we felt should be developed just to get more density in that old industrial area, and what that would mean in terms of green space if we follow the policy that Fife Council has. So for the Nairn side, if we had 200 homes on here, we would need 12,000 square meter of green space. And this is what we developed. This was the point where we got Calum involved to develop a scheme that provides good affordable housing, but also ensures that we have the right amount of green space that we need. So this is the Nairn side that I had briefly highlighted earlier on, with indicative housing, and then also with an indicative green space of how we could connect both of it. On that lower scheme, on that lower diagram, you can see that we were really careful where we had active frontages to the main street, of course, but then also to the back. So it's like well overlooked, it feels safe, it activates the green space. And that was our little diagram of what they thought it could look like. And all of that would still feed into the wider green network and assist with active travel, provide immediate green space outside your house, help with biodiversity, help with stormwater management. And that is my final image of the second site, which is a more linear park. And with that, I think I'm going to hand over to Kevin, who has been an absolute star client on all of my green infrastructure plans.
I'll just share my screen. Okay, hopefully you can see my presentation now.
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, I'm just gonna, okay, put it back. Yeah, just to say, Leanne and their pioneers have been really good too in terms of working in Fife and especially Lindburn. So yeah, I'm just gonna talk about Lindburn. I could have talked about Kirkcaldy as well, but I think I'll talk about Lindburn and the lessons from Lindburn and sort of the journey that's got on from Lindburn. So the title that's from strategy to impact, and then it'll then it links in then to what Lisa Marie's going to talk about with the community garden. So just to introduce myself, I'm Kevin O'Kane, Green Space Partnership Officer with Communities and Neighbourhoods in Fife Council. And then just briefly what I do, I think it's strategies and plans, community development and implementation. So the Fife Green Space Strategy, which we had to do as a planning document, requirements now in law as an open space strategies, but I worked on that a way back in 2011, and it still has a lot of bedrock of work I do. And I suppose it wasn't really in my job description, but a lot of the work has been about community development as well. And we've working in Dunfermline, we've just set up a new green space charity, which has got 2 employees, and Lisa, who's talking later, she's a trustee of the charity as well. And then just finally, just implementation. A lot of work is about fundraising, construction of projects, and then land management. So I just thought I'd throw in, I mean, Leanne's talking about the importance of green infrastructure and green spaces, but you know, in the lockdown, the only open community assets we had were the green spaces, and I think a lot of the time, you know, they're taken for granted. But you know, and certainly in the lockdown, the impact on people's physical and mental health. And just even Leanne talking about the railway lines and the paths in North Edinburgh, just, you know, it's important for the quality of life. So again, just touching on where Dunfermline is. So it's north of the Forth, and you know, in Fife, it's got a population of about 60,000, and it was designated as a city a couple of years ago. And then as Leanne's touching it as well, it's the project area is 2 parks, and then we added in, because of funding, a funding application we added in Took, but it's been instrumental and really important as part of the project as well. So it runs along the Lynn Burn, which is a small burn, like it's not a long river in terms of Scottish rivers, but it runs sort of diagonally through Dunfermline at the hills above near Cowdenbeath and into the Forth. And then, so yeah, just these are the elements I'll talk about in terms of the journey through doing Lindburn. So it started off with the green space strategy. I'll talk about that, a bit about partnership, community. Leanne's mostly touched on the master plan, implementation of it, and then just the impacts. I think it's important to talk about. So yeah, it just started off with the green space strategy. And in the green space strategy, it talked about, we had to do an audit, part of these open space strategies, green space strategy, you have to do an audit of the access to green space, the amount of green space, and the quality. So in Dunfermline, the Woodmill Park of the Lindburn was highlighted as orange and like below average quality, so it needed to be improved. So that led then using that as evidence for green networks. Leanne's talked about it in Kirkcaldy, the green network zone. So Lindburn was zoned in Dunfermline. And so we worked with colleagues in planning to zone green networks. And there was also Nature Scott colleagues there as well. They were working in terms of how we zone green networks. So that then resulted in Nature Scott talking to SEPA, and I mean, I've just generated this image, but it was really, you know, it's a bit over the top, about Lindburn, but it's you know, canalized urban river that's, you know, was poor for biodiversity and pretty ugly. So they all realized it needed to be improved. So that led on then to a partnership between Fife Council and SEPA. So SEPA said, look, we'll naturalize the burn, but you need to put money into you know, improving the green space. So that's what happened. So it's been a great partnership with SEPA. And then, yeah, communities being vital. Lisa's on the call, but, you know, working with the community and has been vital to the success of the project as well. So we did 2 consultations, one with Green Space Scotland and Woodmill and Rex Park about improving it. And then I did work in the community in Tuch. So there was a play park that was needed to improve, which we improved as part of the project. But also the garden was the second highest priority, and it was pretty run down. Nobody was sitting in it. There's a bench, but even on a sunny day, nobody would sit in it. It was pretty miserable. And the other side was that it's not they've changed the name, but when Lisa started, it was originally called Grow and Play Dunfermline. So they were looking for a base, and because I've, you know, worked a long time in Fife and worked a long time in Dunfermline, you know, they were wondering where they could get a bit of land for a community garden. Now this is, you know, you can go anywhere in Scotland, any communities, and I mean, Scotland has a big problem with land ownership and all that. So and also a lot of communities want to have a garden in a nice area. So there's some quite nice parks and other parts of Dunfermline. But I said to them, look, there's a derelict garden in Tuch. What about that? And yeah, they agreed. So that was really good. And that's just been instrumental in the project. And then, I mean, Leanne's been talking about the master plan. So I suppose master plans, it can be a sort of nearly a snapshot in time, because when we first did because we've been doing this a long time, when we first did the master plan, the garden really wasn't there. It was just just an area of seating. So then, just moving on to implementation of the project and a series of projects. The river restoration, when we were doing it, it's very difficult. It's very technical. You have to work with civil engineering consultants, and there was quite a change of staff with them. But it wasn't just them, it was the other side of SEPA, the regulatory side, which was difficult because you have to do water flood calculations and all. So that just took ages, and that was quite difficult. Also, river restoration is really, really expensive. You're talking, you know, this was like over £1 million worth of work, whereas actually green infrastructure is peanuts compared to that. And so the green infrastructure, or the green space side of it's been a really good project. You know, working with UrbanPioneers, Leanne and Marion's been great. We had good staff in the council as well. So that was pretty. The only thing was the contractor was we had a difficult contractor, so we're still having to you know, there's this nagging list, but you know, the output has been really good. And then just finally impacts, and just talk about 3: flooding, resilience, nature, and people. So again, the burn was canalized, it was straightened, there was concrete walls, the walls were starting to break. The other point is, with a lot of Scottish, like a lot of urban rivers, they're canalized, which means the water flows fast through. So all this was happening was that parts of the river downstream were parts of, you know, Dunfermline downstream are flooding. So I'm calling it flooding resilience, because the SEPA and the, you know, the water engineers, you know, you can't say that you're reducing flooding, but it does actually have an impact in flooding, because what actually happened with this bit of the Lindburn, because we widened it and we meandered it, it meant actually that it became quite dynamic. So the burn actually, on the left side of that, you can see there's a bit of a meander, but the river's actually decided to go another route. So you have 2 routes, So that's starting to slow the water down if there is flows of water, but also creates habitats for nature. So we can't. This is a beautiful bird. It's a river bird called the kingfisher. Now we can't totally. I mean, I never actually saw any way back 10 years ago, but now people say, "Oh, we see." Look, the local people are saying, "Oh, we see the kingfisher now." So I think that's a great impact that the quality of the water courses start to change because you're getting more little fish and all in the burns. So that's a really good impact. So we have actually brought a lot of nature back to this part of Dunfermline. And then just finally the people, which Lisa's going to talk about. So yeah, there's a rundown garden and now it's become this great community asset. I mean, Lisa will talk about how it's become a bump area in terms of local people and just the volunteering going on and the social impact and people's mental health and like they're getting Duke of Edinburgh, volunteers and the garden now, they're planting that out to schools using the raised beds. They're even going to plant, distribute food for the food bank. The other thing about this was that a lot of community gardens, people want a big fence up around them, partly just to think, oh, will we get vandalized if we let anybody in? But the great thing when we were starting all this off and Lisa and all were saying, no, we'll not have it. So it's really integrated into the community and the residents. So it's actually had the opposite effect. There's hardly any vandalism in the garden because it's open access. People can go anytime. And a lot of allotments are put in across Scotland have big 2-meter high fences, whereas we've put raised beds in that have total open access and the whole community can use. And pride has really risen, and Tuk was, as I said, I didn't say at the start, it was in the top 10% of multiple deprivation. So this garden has become, real pride in the community. So yeah, so Lisa's going to talk more about that, but thanks for listening for me. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand over to Calum.
Thank you. How are we doing for time? We're good?
We're a bit behind time. It's 10:37,
Right,
Calum,
okay.
but we
Right,
want to
okay.
hear what you have to say.
Okay, I'll stick to the message. So I'll just share. And click that. Sorry, will I just try and come out of full screen if I can? No. Okay, so I can't see my notes, so I'll wing it. I'm Calum Duncan of Calum Duncan Architects. We're a small practice in Edinburgh. I'm conservation accredited, sustainability accredited, and also a Passive House certified designer. Don't want to talk too much about us, but just to say that we do have an ambition in the office to work on person-centered designs. And looking carefully at what exists. So we call this, if we call it creative reimagining. So looking to transform spaces without necessarily making more stuff, but just taking care and understanding what exists and what people's needs are. We're environmentally responsible is top of the agenda. And yeah, just an understanding that it's not just about the glossy image, but transformative potential of architecture is this idea of creative reimagining of spaces and places. Background is on a number of various projects, working in Edinburgh and Malcolm Fraser Architects in my past. And we try to work on about half community or education projects and half residential projects in the office, and we find that that's a nice balance of work. In terms of the Green Infrastructure Master Plan, I've always kind of wondered about the definition of it, and certainly I would probably prefer to be talking about a green infrastructure strategic plan than a master plan, which has connotations around gender, but also maybe ownership and ideas of how co-design aspects of master planning can be encouraged. And this is maybe a slightly unfair thing to do to Google master plans, but there's two aspects that I'd like to sort of get across within this presentation. And one is that when people are given a site, when architects specifically are given sites to develop, you can see in all these images that there's a very strong idea of where the boundary exists. So in some people, you know, the worst is probably the top left, which sometimes it gets called chocolate box architecture, where you're given the box and it's how many things can you fit within that box. But certainly within all of these, you get that feeling that there is a strong boundary, and how does it connect beyond that boundary? The other thing that often happens as an architect is the architect feels the need to be the lead in this. And the example of the green infrastructure plan, slightly unusual in Kirkcaldy involving an architect, but to look at sites is that we follow what has been learned through that green infrastructure. And those are the two things that I really take away from that. And this is just looking at what I would say from a Googling point of view is finding a good example. This isn't really a Google, it's a project I know fairly well by architects in Denmark called Van Kunsten, who are looking beyond the remit. And you can see it in the drawing, the sense of how people use spaces, what the roads and streets are used for, and you can see that they're going beyond the boundary into connections outside of that site. For Kirkcaldy, we were, as Liana mentioned, we were asked to look at two specific sites within and following the research that had been done through the Green Infrastructure Master Plan. And what came to mind with most of the work that we do in relation to housing is competition has involved with previously at Malcolm Fraser Architects, which was we set out 4 clear principles at the beginning. This is to do with making safe streets, safe to walk on, play on, looking at communal green space as well as private green space, so how far away you could locate cars from those to make those safe streets. Green pedestrian routes, so in this case there was a green spine through the middle, and the orientation in relation to sunlight. So these are all ideas that I come back to as time and time again as we had come up with this strategy within that competition, and it's very relevant here. So the Kirkcaldy example, unusual to ask an architect to look at 2 sites, but as a way of testing opportunities with following the Green Infrastructure Master Plan and part of it, for me, I found it I don't know what the word is, but quite enlightening, I suppose, to be you're given these very clear diagrams and clear direction of what you're looking at. So here there are, on the left is the missing links that has been highlighted, and on the right looking at quality of space as well. Then propose connections, which is between green space and also to communities and facilities. And on the right, looking at what are the opportunities here where good housing is needed, and how can we look at this green infrastructure to inform the best places for development. So this is just looking at that diagram, and again, this was about massing on the site, looking at proposal in terms of massing, not necessarily completed architectural proposals, but the intention to reopen a tunnel to the top left of the site on this Nairn Street site, and to understand the key nodes and how they connect in terms of pedestrian and sustainable travel and opportunities for play and making safe streets and green spaces within the site. And as Leanna had shown, this was again just a massing proposal to start to try to imagine what that could look like and how we could work with, in this case, quite good density compared to what maybe a typical house developer would do with that site, but still with the key connections and spaces being made. And on the other site, a lower scale, more terraced houses or that typology scale of housing, but again, looking at communal green spaces and routes through the site to what lies beyond. And so then investigating ideas around what that might look like in terms of massing. So the takeaways for me really are the Green Infrastructure Master Plan results, I feel, in designs which think beyond. They're looking at a town-wide network of green space, sustainable travel, and improved accessibility, air quality, biodiversity, ecology. Looking at missing links and how they can be resolved, and so that future development can resolve those missing links rather than impede those missing links and create more missing links. And it encourages housing which has good access to green space, wild space, natural play, and good access to local facilities. So I sort of feel, why would you not go through that process if you're looking at future housing developments? And I shall leave it there.
Thank you very much, Calum. And thank you very much to all three of you for really interesting presentations. I think actually reflecting, I suppose, on some of the things you've said, Calum, your sort of differentiation between strategic and the master plan. I think Kevin talked about the fact that things evolved as it happened, which a strategic plan maybe, in my mind, allows for more kind of change to happen within it if you have an end goal, but it allows for things to develop as you work with the place and with the community. So thank you very much to all three of you. Do we have any questions from the audience? You can either raise your hand or...
Yeah, can I ask a question?
Yes, fire away.
Thank you, thanks. So it's probably more for, I'm Beth Landon. I'm a community development officer working for Borders Community Action, which is the third sector interface in the Scottish Borders. And at the moment, I'm supporting groups with community-led planning, in particular developing local place plans. So I'm really interested to ask Kevin to what extent any existing community plans were taken into consideration with your Green Infrastructure Master Plan.
Yeah, well, I suppose with Lindburn, we go back over like 12 years. So it's sort of changed over time. So yeah, I mean, local place plans are just new, so to speak, and communities are trying to work through them. So so I mean, as I said, we did two consultations. We did one consultation with Green Space Scotland and Zero Waste Scotland on Woodmill and Lindburn, and the community consultation on the green spaces and what needs to change. And then I did community work in Tuch to ask what was needed. And again, it was the play park which we improved, and then it was the garden. And in Fife, we've had a lot of Coalfields Regeneration Trust have done a lot of work in communities, and there's been Coalfield Regeneration Trust community development plans. So there was one for Tuch, and so elements of the work I did then were put into that community development plan. And Tuch's been really good in terms of Fife, because again, it's a highly deprived community, and there's in Dunfermline, there was Abbey View that was regenerated. So there's a lot of money spent over 10 years ago in Abbey View, and Took was quite neglected. So there's, I mean, Lisa's part of it, she'll talk about, but there's a community forum in Took. So the whole community pride's really raised, and there is a lot of change in the housing in Took. So, and there's a, you know, so there's a lot more, there's a lot going on in Took at the minute. And I suppose the other thing is we, over like since 12 years, we was Dunfermline Public Park. We did improving the public park. That led on to Dunfermline Green Space Forum, which is now turned into a charity. And we've got a green space strategy for Dunfermline. So Lisa's, as I said, a trustee. So I think Dunfermline's good because there's quite a lot, like there's about 5 or 6 community councils in Dunfermline. So there is quite active, and there's a city plan. So again, with councils, there's lots of plans. It's just implementing plans and trying to take on board what the community want.
Kevin, can I ask a question on the back of that? Because it's a question that David Somerville puts it in the chat around the overall kind of budget that you spend. Because I think particularly in Lindburn, you mentioned that was £1 million for the naturalisation of the river, and you said that the green infrastructure was cheap in comparison. So what was the overall budget for Lindburn and Tooth?
Well,
as I've now learned to pronounce it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's been two like flood. There was before, even before that, there was a flood management project that ended up costing 30 million in Dunfermline. So I mean, it's less. It's about 800 meters long. The river restoration in Lindburn, and I mean, it's over $1 million in terms of construction costs. But then you have to spend a lot of money on consultants, these engineering consultants. So that tops it up. You know, it's, I think maybe like about 1.5 million, and then we committed, Fife Council committed to spend it's £500,000 on green infrastructure, green space. So that normally that's never, you very rarely get all that amount of money. Now the problem is that it's very hard. We've got a Fife Council grounds maintenance service, which is no budget and no staff. So you have to be very careful how you actually put in green infrastructure. So we ended up spending a lot of money on the garden and that's paid dividends because the community are maintaining that. And then we spent a lot of money on trees. So we actually spent a lot of money on low maintenance and seating. So we did actually spend a lot. Not, it's never as you get, but usually it's peanuts doing green space or green infrastructure. But we actually had a good budget and we had to be very careful how it was maintained.
Okay, thanks very much. Again, any other questions from anyone in the room? Leanne, I had a question for you, Leanne, and I've got questions for Lisa already because of the way the presentations have kind of gone, but you might reflect on it. I know there's been research on public's responses to natural planting, different publics responding in different ways, with fundamentally weeds being seen, which are natural planting, and people then having perceptions around that. Have you come across that either in your work in Fife or elsewhere, that being problematic? Because even I suppose the naturalisation of the river, I looked at that and thought I can imagine some people having a different response to what it looks like in a natural way than it did when it was canalised. Leanne, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, it really is. Yeah, there's a lot of research out that actually shows that also specific groups with cultural background feel that wilder spaces are neglected spaces really, and they don't feel safe in those spaces. I think it's really about taking your community along on that journey and explaining what you're doing and why you're doing it. And I think over the next couple of years, we will probably see that there's a slight change in design aesthetics. I think people will understand it more, also because climate change is in everybody's ears and everybody knows that we just need to make sure that we create biodiverse spaces, which doesn't necessarily mean cut grass everywhere. So that also helps with the maintenance. But the thing is, we can't argue with the maintenance really when we speak to the communities about it, because it might just sound that it's just yet another cost savings exercise, which it actually isn't. It really also supports biodiversity and climate adaptation. I think over the next couple of years, there will be that kind of like shift in aesthetics. But at the moment, you really need to take people along and explain it's not just a cost savings exercise. And yeah, safety comes into that as well. So you need to make sure that the spaces that you create still feel safe by either lighting, appropriate lighting, or social surveillance, and that it doesn't have a neglected feel. I mean, quite often we do things like, all the designers, of course, do things like having wildflower meadows framed by a verge of cut grass, just so it feels like intentional and not like just derelict, left over, not cared for space. But it is certainly something that is still in everybody's mind. Yeah.
We've got not questions in, but really positive comments about what you've all shared with us. Particularly somebody who's visited Limburn and is really pleased to see what you planted there, what's been designed in. But on that latter point, because I was recently walking in North Edinburgh, and I was around some millennium planting that took place, which has gone quite wild and is visually impenetrable, which I was interested in because it was a part of Edinburgh that I grew up in, and I used to hang out there. And I hung out there because it wasn't seen. And you mentioned that there was an area where teenagers hung out, which isn't accessible. In terms of your design approach, do you design in those sort of spaces where some people might view it as antisocial behavior, some people might just view it as normal teenage behavior, and actually part of good human development? Are you able to design that into any of the plans?
Absolutely. I think absolutely we have to plan in spaces for teenagers to hang out. I do have those arguments with everybody else involved in the design team, from councils and neighbors, of course, who are worried about vandalism and antisocial behavior. But if you don't provide spaces for your children as they grow up, I mean, they are our future. And we've all been teenagers. I mean, most of that behavior is just, it's not, yeah, it's just natural behavior, I feel. So yes, we try and design them in. We try and be quite careful with the setting where we design those spaces in. Sometimes you can't design them in because, of course, teenagers don't go to the spaces where you want them to be. They kind of like find their own spaces to go. But you absolutely have to make space for them, and you have to have those arguments, whoever is in your team and whoever is against it. Yeah, green space is for everyone and needs to be completely inclusive. And that means you just have to create different corners, I think, with different character areas, and different people will find their space.
Thanks very much. Nancy, you've got a question.
Hi there. I'm really impressed by the work that you've done, and it looks amazing. I must go and visit. I think if I'm taking a step back right to the very beginning, I'd be interested to know whether or not the catalyst for this was actually the green space strategy, or if there was a sort of groundswell of the local community who were looking actually to do something with their area.
Don't know who wants to answer that. Kevin, do you want to answer that?
Yeah.
Somebody from the client
yeah,
side?
I think, yeah. I mean, I suppose it's the catalyst. I mean, the thing about council strategies that councils have to do in terms of planning legislation, you know, a lot of the times they mightn't actually make a difference. So I think this is a good example of a strategy where, because we did a lot of engagement with like council officers and other agencies, and the way it was produced, and it was pinpointing green spaces that need to be improved, that it actually set a train in motion. I mean, didn't actually say, but the transportation, put £500,000 in for a cycleway. We got for play parks. So yeah, so they can actually make a difference, council strategies, in terms of planning. So they are good. And then because I've been doing this 12 years, so it's evolved, and like we did consultation, and engagement, and we didn't have the green space charity at the start, and we didn't have a green space forum. So that's all come nearly as part of it, and then it's led on to other things, and then like grow and play with the garden that wasn't there, and that's been a big part. So yeah, so it was a strategy to start at this. It wasn't community. I work in other areas of Fife, and it can be community and that's led, but this was actually a council led project.
Thank you. I think from that, it seems to me that the success of this is not just what you've created on the ground, but your ability to involve the community and for them to take ownership of it and take it forward in partnership with yourselves. So I think that in itself is a huge big plus for this project. So well done.
Thanks. Well, Lisa will be talking, the next hour, but no, that we've been it's been so fortunate that they came on, because the benefits of the garden and what they've done, the council can't really do, so that's a really good example. And she'll talk about the challenges as well, because, there's a lot of voluntary effort that's not being paid, where, we get paid. Thanks.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks very much, Nancy. And I mean, I suppose the fenceless garden is the thing that really strikes me, the fact that there's community ownership there. We've got two final questions that we're going to squeeze in before we stop for our coffee. One is from Gala, who's asking, have you ever tried parametric design to explore different ways to connect the corridors and to select where to place gates? So that's maybe a question that Leanne and Calum, you might want to kind of reflect on. And the other one is from David Somerville, who's asking, do permaculture design approaches have a role in such work? Who wants to go first?
I don't use parametric design in terms of positions of gates or corridors, for example, but certainly it does start to touch on a couple of things in terms of how we collect data, and also venturing into the world of AI, where I have seen some fairly scary presentations on AI and architecture, and I'm actually not too against a lot of it, but it's this sort of thing where if you put good information in, you will get good results out. If you put rubbish in, you get rubbish out. And I certainly think there is a place for looking at, the relationship. You can have a algorithm for good planning design, good connection to green space. And certainly one of the things that I was really impressed at Fife Council was the proximity between houses and the nearest green space had been mapped out. And I certainly think that all local authorities would benefit. It starts to come into what NPF4 is asking for and looking at, but it's just fantastic to have that data and information to reflect on and then build that into your design. But all of these things I would say are tools, and it's how you use these tools that is important, if available.
Yeah, thanks so much. Leanne.
I think, yeah, I agree with Calum. I think data is really important, I feel. Quite often we don't have access to the right data, or it's complicated to get the right data. I think community consultation as such can only get you so far, because it's quite complicated to get the full breadth of the community that lives around your green spaces. And it's time that the community has to invest, and sometimes invest over and over again, because we might have several consultations across a period of time. I think data can fill a lot of the gaps, particularly if we don't manage to get certain people on the table, which are important, just to know who is your audience, who are you designing for, and how do I get that? How do I actually, if there's like a large Muslim population, how do I get them on my table? So I think Calum is right. It's kind of like, how do we use the data and what do we do with it? But it's very difficult to quite often get to the data that I would like to have, so I can design better spaces for the people who I design for. So yeah.
Good answer. Do you have any comment on designing permaculture design?
We don't really, yeah. we don't really overlap that much at the moment. I feel I mean I think the biggest contribution that we as landscape architects can bring to a site really is the strategic approach that I guess that could feed into that. Unlike Calum, so Calum mentioned that architects quite often look at a site as a site, while landscape architects really always, the first thing you learn at university is look at the city, look at the town, see the green connections, see how you fit into that larger part of the green connections. So I think the biggest thing that we usually bring to the table is like the strategic overview of how we connect all of those spaces and what we can do beyond our immediate site. I think permaculture kind of like it's almost more like a detailed face into that, so it could kind of like slot into certain areas, but it's not been anything that we had a lot of like contact with at the moment.
Well, thank you very much, all three of you. You will see in the chat that Fife Council is getting major recognition for the approach that is taken before it was a required approach, and obviously both Calum and Leanne, you've also given that recognition to Fife Council with the data that they have. I'm sure other people, your colleagues from Fife Council, might say, well, yeah, there's still things that we could do better, but it's really nice to hear people showing recognition to a local authority who are often blamed for lots of stuff. So it's worth taking that back to your colleagues as well, Kevin. I think your presentations have all kind of whetted our appetites for what it's been like for the community experience on the ground. So no pressure on you, Lisa, but we're really keen to hear what it's been like in terms of taking on the management of that of the garden. We've gone a bit over time, so our times have changed. It's now 11:06. Let's say take a break now. We'll come back at 11:15 and we'll hear from Leanne then. So, but thank you again to our three speakers, and see you in 9 minutes. Okay, it's almost 1:15. So we've kind of gone from looking at green infrastructure at I suppose what you would say a city neighbourhood scale in what the presentations were in the first part of this morning. And I think what we're going to now go and look at is one particular detail of that. And Lisa Murray is going to share with us the community experience with the community garden at Tuch. Apologies for mispronouncing it earlier, Lisa. So Lisa, thank you for giving your time to us this morning. And if you want to unmute and share your presentation with us, that would be great. That's it, we can see it. That's
brilliant. Morning, everyone. My name is Lisa Murray, and I'm one of the directors of Tuch Community Garden. So today I'm going to be talking a wee bit about the impact that working with Leanne and Kevin has had on our project, and the impact that we've had on our local community. So this is a photo of Tuch. It's, as you can see, it's a really urban area. It's a mix of high flats and terraced housing. There's a lot of urban regeneration going to be going on there, not just that's happened at the garden, but some of these bigger flats are getting pulled down, which we're also going to be involved in. As Kevin mentioned, Tuch sits within the most deprived 10% of households within Scotland, and the longer you spend actually working with the community, you just realise just how deprived it is. A lot of people in crisis in Tuch. But as Kevin had mentioned before, there was a community action plan drawn up with the Council and Coalfields Regeneration Trust, and part of that was about the community garden, because it was an existing community garden, and residents wanted to upgrade that community garden. And this is the community garden in July 2020, when our group first was chatting to Kevin about a possibility of siting a community garden somewhere across Dunfermline. So it has the bare bones of a garden. You can see the broken fence, the broken gate. That was the second gate. The first one was nicked within the first week of it going up. It's very neglected. It wasn't used at all. I think there had been paths originally, but they were all overgrown. No one sat on the bench because you get your feet wet even just trying to get to the bench. And it was very unloved. This is looking down from the existing community garden. As you can see, it's just all plain grass. So when you're the first photo there, the left-hand photo is where the community growing area is now. That's looking down towards that building. The building at the bottom is the Scout Hall. The Scouts are involved in our project as well. And then this is the second photo, is from the Scout Hall looking up, and that patch of grass there is where our wildflower meadow and orchard is, and there's now a nice path through there as well, and a little picnic bench that's really well used. And this is it now. This was taken last week in between the rain showers. I think what you notice, for me anyway, what you notice right away is that it's a completely open layout. We have our community notice board where we do a lot of signage for signposting people for help that they can get from either local council or charities, etc. if there's events on as well. We have our bin. All along that front border there's edible hedging, and again, people can just help themselves when they go past. It's a mix of blackcurrant, red currant, gooseberries. All our paths throughout the whole garden are accessible, which we felt was really important, because there's a lot of single mums with very young children in the area, and there's a lot of elderly people, and we wanted our paths to be accessible for all. We've got our new seating, etc. We've created a bump area for local residents where they can come past and they'll stop and they'll chat and they'll bump into each other, and you can have quite a crowd down there blethering, which is lovely. And none of that was happening before we did our garden project. And that's looking down the hill. You can see the big trees that Leanne was talking about putting in to the project. These are all adopted. And as you can see, some people have planted round the trees. So we've got a community growing area there, again, our accessible paths. And then further down there's the orchard and wildflower meadow. And we've got bike racks as well. We've kept that big circle of grass in the middle for our bouncy castle when we do community events. And these were taken last summer of our meadow and orchard area. We've got two of our volunteers. Lorna there is one of our other main directors that really drives this project. And James has got his, I think it was pear from memory, from his tree, which he was absolutely thrilled with. And the middle picture, these are the youngest scouts, the squirrels from the scout hut at the bottom of the hill, and they were planting their winter veg for their soup, which they were thrilled about. They had never planted before, so they were really delighted. And this is our container. This has been our kind of latest big project that we've added within the garden. So it's our community hub. We had done a lot of fundraising for the container. We thought, containers are only by a couple of grand. No. It costs you even 4,000 just to get it sited at the place. So we had raised 24,000, just over 24,000, but fortunately through our council connections, we actually had that container donated by BAM Construction, who are working on the local super campus in Dunfermline. They're combining a site of 2 high schools and a college. So BAM, we got that through community benefits from BAM Construction, who also came down and painted it for us. and they put the accessible pavers in there. They've been repurposed from Madras College when it was rebuilt, big high school in St Andrews. We've been very, very lucky with the container and with all the support that we've had from local companies. We used our 24,000 that we had saved for our container to put in utilities. And since then, we've put in, our local joiners put in bench storage seating. We've got cushions for it. We've got a bookcase that's now full of books. This is a bit of an older picture. And we've got a new kitchen. And in that space, we also have a fridge. And these are some of the companies that have helped us and our funders as well. It's been a real community effort. And when we're down at the garden, that door is open. We've got 3 windows that have got their vandal-proof windows. The shutter's open, the door's open, and people pop past for a cup of tea or a coffee and a biscuit, or often just a chat. We have every dog in the neighbourhood round for a biscuit as well. So it's really nice, and it's really adding to the local community. So when I was thinking about doing this presentation, I was thinking about the expected benefits that we kind of were looking at, and I think possibly Kevin was looking at or thinking that we might get from this project. Obviously, improved green space. This is a picture from last year. I haven't managed to get any sunny photos this year. So improved green space, urban regeneration. We expected the main challenges would be vandalism. There is a huge amount of antisocial behaviour in Tooch. There's a huge amount of drug addiction and alcoholism, and it's a place where the police visit every day. So we expected that we would have a lot of that. And we did wonder how the project would go. We also wondered about community buy-in, because none of the people that were involved in the group at the time belonged from Tooch. And Tooch is fully enclosed as an area. There's about 1,500 people live in it. It's fully enclosed, and there's no major route goes through it. It goes round it. So no one visits Tooch unless you're going to visit someone you know. So it's a very enclosed, it's a very isolated neighbourhood. Very isolated, and they have a real mistrust of the police, and they have a real mistrust of the council as well, actually. So we were told they're a very difficult community to reach. These are some of the things that different people told us in 2020 when we started the project. So again, you had mentioned about the lack of fencing. We were told by the police to put up a 6-foot steel fence. When we asked what kind of fence would we be better putting round it, keep it locked, we'll just get trashed. The council, we had a 6-month argument with the council to get a bin. They didn't want to put it in Tooch because it would just get set fire to. And even the local residents, one of them who overlooks the garden said, "I admire you for trying, but it's Tooch, it'll probably just get wrecked." However, pleased to say, fencing, we still have none. The reason that we have fencing, that we have no fencing, is because that's what the community wanted. We took down the broken fencing. They were so glad to see the back of it, because their dogs were getting trapped in it. And we were talking to them about, and we talked to everyone that passes, what kind of fence would you like to see around the garden? We were thinking of putting one, you know, maybe about 3 foot or whatever, and they're like, actually, we prefer no fence. It looks better open. So that's what we did. It's completely open planned, even the growing areas. And yeah, it works. It really works. The bin is fully intact. Touchwood has never been set on fire, and it's well used. And the local resident that said that to us way back in 2020 acknowledges that they do love the garden. So yeah, it's I'd like to go back and say to these people, look. However, there have been many challenges. The planning permission for the container was very stressful. They put in planning permission. We put in planning permission for the container and the utilities to go in. And we're really, really lucky because Paul Gallagher, the manager who oversees is the liaison between the contractors building the super campus and the council. He helped us put in the planning permission, and that was a really big help. But it was still hugely stressful because we kept getting turned down because it was only a temporary structure, and it had to be fully accessible. And I have to say that the relationships that we built up with BAM Construction were brilliant, because they really helped us. They put in the utilities, they organised the contractors for us, and it was a huge weight off our mind, actually. The lease was an absolute saga. So we had operated the garden. The garden's on housing land. We'd operated the garden for 3 years without a lease. But as soon as we got the container, we needed a lease. So initially, Estates contacted us and said, we'll lease the area underneath. You can lease the area underneath the container and it'd be £250. And we're like, well, that's quite a lot. We had contacted the allotment manager about utilities and the best way to get them put in, etc., etc. And I happened to mention the lease, which was a big mistake, because he then got involved, and we went from, he said, don't sign the lease, and came back with a new lease which encompassed the whole 2,715 square metres of the garden area, bearing in mind it's all open plan, and the lease went from 250 to 1,200, which encompassed all the pavements, all the street lighting, the parking, all of it was going to be within our lease. So we were like, no, we're not being responsible for that. Least of all because it's not a fenced area. And these flats are due to come down beside the garden in the next 5 years. So there's going to be a big amount of building work. We're just, no. So we contacted our local councillors, who we also have good relationships with, and they advocated on our behalf, so did Kevin. And they came back and said, okay, we'll go back to the land under the cabin. And then we thought that was sorted. We're waiting on the new lease came out. The new lease came out and we'd gone back up. The allotment manager had been back involved, and it had gone back up to the full area. And it was back up to 500 being charged per square metre under allotment rates. So as a group, we thought enough's enough, and we sent a very pointed email to the council and said, council officers, councillors, anyone that had any involvement in the garden got this email with the reasons why we shouldn't be having to lease this whole area. And it was a piece of nonsense, because it is council land. So I'm pleased to say it reached the head of housing, head of facilities, and we now pay a peppercorn lease of £1, which they don't collect. So that eventually sorted out, took months. Utilities, I mentioned, the utilities were a real headache. You had to dig up the pavements around the garden. They dug out the grassy area beside the flats, only to find it was the wrong drain. They hit a gas main and eventually ended up having to dig right out to the street, which was obviously all fenced off, and we took ages to get it signed off by Scottish Water, and it was really difficult. Reliance on volunteers, as Kevin mentioned, myself and the other volunteers are doing what is actually a big project, and we're not getting paid for it. You know, we do a lot. We do a lot of work on behalf of housing, anti-poverty, over and above looking after this huge garden area. and it's very much reliant on volunteers, which takes an awful lot of time. The contractors were mentioned briefly by either Kevin or Leanne. The contractors really held us back. They were a bit of a nightmare. Nice enough people, but they didn't stick to the timescales. They would say that they would be in the garden on this day, this would be getting done, you know, new path getting put in this week, and they wouldn't come all the time. Large sections of the garden were behind 6-foot Harris fencing. So that was really, and because it was really difficult, and because we were the people in the project, we were the people out of the project that everyone saw, we would get it. What's happening? When is this getting done? But luckily, we have a really good relationship with Leanne and Mary and Leanne's partner and Kevin, and we were backwards and forwards an awful lot about the contractors. But it all worked out again. The antisocial neighbour, there's more than one antisocial neighbour, but one in particular, absolutely awful. It was a nightmare. He was moved into the flat right beside the garden, not long out of jail, immediately started drug dealing. The smell of drugs was overwhelming in the garden, so we couldn't have kids down at the garden, couldn't really run any events. He was in amongst the contractors, annoying them all the time. Steady stream of folk to his window for drugs, and it was just really difficult. Fortunately, he has now been moved out, I think, in the dead of night for his own safety, having fallen out with some of the other local residents. The random photo at the side is our micro library. So we have a little micro library, usually stuffed full of adults and kids' books, and 3 times now, local school kids, they're high school boys, 2nd or 3rd year boys, have ripped the front cover off it, which is a real shame because it was really popular amongst the local residents. They really loved having a little book lending library, and it was really well used with parents and carers who'd come down and read to the kids in the garden. But we've now got two young local residents that are building us a wooden one. So a wooden door will be easier to put on. So as you can see, our challenges are completely different from what we expected them to be. This is our border area. We took up our bamboo, which was not very biodiverse, and put in this. We think it's a beautiful border. Yeah, we have got so many other benefits from the garden, way beyond, I think, what the council or ourselves expected. But it really highlights the possibility of what can be done on the back of a green infrastructure plan at a community level. Because through this garden, through this, what is effectively a fairly small amount to do up green infrastructure, we've been able to build community through it. You know, we've built local pride. People are genuinely proud and took of the garden. They really look after it. They really look after it and they really like it. And everyone says that, from your drug addicts to your old ladies, you know, everyone. The kids love to rollerblade in the garden because it's accessible path, so it's nice for rollerblading, skateboarding. It's been really popular. It's really given them a sense of local pride. We've really been able to help with social isolation. A lot of these people, obviously the flats don't have their own gardens. A lot of drug addiction, and people are sat up in these flats on their own. And we set our project up during lockdown, and we spoke earlier about the importance of getting out to green spaces during lockdown. And this is a nice space to sit in. I mean, in fact, 2 of our volunteers at the moment are homeless. They live in scatter flats. One's a recovering addict, one's still really struggling, very socially isolated, because they're in communities that they don't know. They don't know anyone in the community, but they come down to the garden and they love it. And it's a real support for them to be able to come down, work in the garden and have that social connection. You know, it's been so important to have that social connection. And we've done a lot of, and not just our own garden volunteers, but people passing by that have come to us for help or just even a chat. And we've done a lot of anti-poverty work, you know, getting people furniture for their flats, helping people on the right benefits. And as a result of that, we've got much more improved community and council links, because we know people will come to us and, you know, moan about something or say they're stuck with something, and we can say, this is who you need to contact. And we can contact that person and advocate on their behalf. As I mentioned, we've really created a community hub. We've really reduced antisocial behaviour in the garden. We do get a lot of teenagers hanging about in the garden. I know that you mentioned, Leanne, about creating a space for teenagers to sit. We don't want a hut or anything in the garden because it'll be a mecca for drug taking. And that's just feeding into, it might sound harsh, but it's a fact. So we don't want to create something like kind of a little hidden seating zone for people, because we have to bear in mind that the garden is in a very residential area. Yeah, so we're very reliant on feedback from the local community, and they get asked what they want all the time. And then we've also managed to link with other charities that are operating in the local area, and we're now at the stage of doing big joint events that are free. We can feed people through them and give people a bit of fun, because a lot of these people they're not able to go on holidays or anything. They don't have a lot. So these are some of the good aspects. I'm not going to go through them all, but I am going to highlight the two things that are really important has been the partnership working, both ourselves and Leanne and Kevin, but also within the community, partnering up with, for example, the Rotary Club, local companies, other people in the council. It's worked really well. Obviously, we belong to this, Kevin mentioned the Two Community Group Forum, which brings together all the community groups within Two and council officers, the food bank, etc. And through that, we're doing a lot of joint events, etc. And it's giving the other big thing, and I think one of the biggest things of this project's success has been the community voice. You know, through this Lindburn project and through our particular part of it, people were asked, what do you think? What kind of trees would you like in the orchard? We're going to do an orchard. What do you think about that? Oh, that'd be nice. What kind of trees do you think you'd like to see in the orchard? What kind of edible hedging would you like? And that has made such a difference to people's well-being. And these are just some of our community pictures. We have a lot of elderly people that come down and chat to us in the garden. And John, the old gentleman there, has for the last 2 years, we've used his water from his back tap because we had no water until we put in the utilities. And little Blake lives overlooking the garden, and she likes to come down, take her book from the little library and come down. The girls are rock painting at one of the big events that we had. And the little dog is Bailey, our garden mascot, with Ali, one of our volunteers from the Rotary. And Victor, who loves to play in the leaves. And we did a little Halloween event. We did a big joint Halloween event with 150 kids plus families up at the church. And we did our own little trick and treat thing on Halloween itself. The other picture with the tyres we ran is from a couple of summers ago. We ran 2 big summer play schemes for families. So we were able to have children from babies right up to 13, which meant that families could bring all of their children. We got it was fully funded, so it was free. It was free. Children got a snack, they got a drink, parents got a cup of tea, parents sat and chatted on the benches that we had put in, and the parent and the kids got to run around with their friends and make new ones. So it was all good fun. When I was asked to do this presentation by Kevin, I asked the other volunteers what they would like me to say, what they wanted me to get across. Asked them what's the best thing about the garden. And I think those quotes speak for themselves. The garden does work for the community, and people really appreciate our hard work to it. So I think to kind of sum up, being part of a larger green space or green infrastructure master plan from a community perspective, the main things that we have got from this is support, signposting and advice from Kevin, from other council officers such as Paul with the container. Marion and I have been backwards and forwards with emails about all sorts of different things this whole time that UrbanPioneers have worked on this project, and we all got on really well, and we know that we can just lift the phone or just email and ask for advice. And both Kevin and Marion and Leanne have been a real support through this process. Mentioned it a wee bit before about partnership between the different kind of key stakeholders in this project has been fantastic. Actually, it's worked really well. It's been a really open partnership. I can't stress enough what a difference it made to have help with planning permission. I don't think that we would have had the ability to create the garden that we've done without help with that planning permission, and without the advice and support with that from UrbanPioneers and Kevin. The community voice, being able to have a situation where the community have been asked for their opinion about something, genuinely asked and genuinely listened to, has been massive. And a lot of councils, Fife included, speak about community engagement, but this was proper community engagement, and it was ongoing community engagement. It wasn't just a couple of meetings. You know, and both Kevin and Marion have been down to the garden and met local residents, chatted to them and asked them what they think. Someone suggested there's a little bench there at the garden, and it was the bench in the original photos from 2020. One of the ladies that lived in the high flats beside the garden had donated 10,000 to the existing, and from her will, to have a community garden made for children. And it's a little bench with her name on it, and sort of in memory of. And one of our local residents had said, you know, it'd be lovely if we could have an arch over this, you know, with flowers over it, and really make it a feature, because it really started with this lady. And I fed that back to Marion, and Marion said, you know, she said, I think we can do that. Now, that local resident is now one of our volunteers, and she remembers that. And we tell people that, you know, and she's a very well-known local resident, so everyone knows that actually that wasn't Marion's idea, it wasn't our idea, it wasn't Kevin's idea, it was Petrina's idea. You know, Petrina that lives up at Law Road. Oh yeah, know her. All right, that's really nice. And that's such a basic thing, but it's such an important thing. And really, I hope at the end of all of our presentations, I hope that people that are listening take away how transformative this project has been, because it really has. Whatever way, whatever angle you want to look at it, from a community angle, from a biodiversity angle, it's been transformative. So to answer the question, is being part of a large green infrastructure project from a community's perspective, has it been worth it? 100% yes. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa. That was fantastic. It was really great to hear. And we had a conference end of last summer looking at community growing, and the reason we were looking at community growing wasn't for the environmental benefits that came out of it. It was because we are able to see that there are so many social benefits that kind of arise out of communities participating in growing and gardening. And you've really illustrated how good it is and the difference that it's made within the community of Tooch. So that's really great to hear. One of the first questions that's come in, and it's a question that I'd have had for you, is you kind of were upfront about the fact that there was a kind of, it came from outside creating the garden, and that there weren't local volunteers involved in it, but you've now obviously got local volunteers. So how did you go about engaging people who actually lived in the estate and around the garden?
Well, I'll be honest and say some of us did and some of us didn't. So I come from a teaching background, so I'm used to working with lots of different people. A lot of the original people that kind of set the project up, full of big ideas, but they didn't really engage with the community as such. But there was a few of us that did. I did, and it was a hi, how are you when you were passing, and it was kind of drawing them into that conversation about the garden, asking them, this isn't our garden, this is your garden. It's not my community, it's your community. So I think that was the main thing that we went in, certainly I did. These other people have left. We're now pretty much completely Tooch based. I'm the only one that's not involved. The Rotary people that come down and help are very much part of the community now as well, even though they live out with. But the bulk of the volunteers are from the community. And it's really just been a case of chatting to people, asking them what they think. Would you like to come and help? And we're very inclusive and non-judgmental. So like I said, you know, a lot of our through traffic in the morning is people going up to get their alcohol or going up to get drugs. You know, or people out walking their dog. It's not a place that you would visit. You know, it's people. That's why I tried to explain it was a very enclosed area. But no, we just spoke to everyone. We were involved in some bigger community engagement events with the council as well. But we did a lot of the community engagement ourselves, and it was a case of just chatting to people as they passed and making them feel part of it. And you know, by doing that, we reached an awful lot of what would be termed difficult to reach people. So Kevin always laughs, it always amazes him. He's like, I can't understand why the garden at Tooch is not vandalised. He said, it's great, it's not vandalised, can't understand why. Well, the local drug dealers look out for it. The local community does. And a lot of these people that are, you know, involved in really severe antisocial behaviour, they got drawn into it, and they became really proud of it, and they really wanted to look after it.
That's good. I mean, I think your use of inclusivity there is actually reflecting something that's maybe slightly different from standard approaches to inclusivity. And it has a very interesting sort of byproduct of that, of people being protective of the space as a whole community, which is really good to hear. But I think what's coming across from you, because you referred to this more than once in your presentation, was about having good relationships. so good relations with the community, but the good relationships you've got within the council, with the team that have worked on this, and with with BAM as well. You referred to the fact that you had a good relationship with them, so that's obviously been key to it. So you can have all the plans and strategy, etc., in place, but having good relationships is beneath that.
Yeah, definitely. You've got to have good relationships with people, and you've got to listen. You've got to listen to what local residents want, because they will kick back if they don't. And it was interesting what Leanne was saying about the wildflower meadow. So at the moment, last 2 years, our wildflower meadow's gone straight down to the path, but it means that cars can't see. It's really difficult to see when you're coming out of that junction. So we're taking it back kind of 6-8 feet, 6 feet, so that people can see.
So you're being responsive.
Yeah, very much so.
Are there any questions from anyone else that's got for Lisa? Feel free to put your hand up or put something in the box. I mean, what was to me is interesting about it is the style of estate in open grassland is like totally identifiable to most of us. We will all know places within our towns or cities that look like that, where it is not biodiverse and it is just mown grass, and it may have trees, but otherwise it's not particularly productive, either environmentally or for the community. And so it's a really good example of how that can be turned around. But yeah, any other? I've had comments from Green Space Scotland looking at some of their other places that they've got some case studies. It's in the chat, and there's also experiences of working with communities elsewhere. Leanne, you've got a question for Lisa.
I have more of a comment, really. I think what Lisa highlighted really well is it's quite difficult for a consultant to really do what I call genuine consultation and getting an understanding of the community, because some of what Lisa mentioned, like people going to get the drugs in the mornings or the alcohol, I will never meet them. It doesn't matter how many events I do or how often I go out. I'm not out at the right time, and quite often I will be met with mistrust just because I represent a certain group, consultants, council, what have you. So I will never get that specific group and their input and their buy-in as well. So that kind of like second stage of really genuine community consultation from the community is invaluable, but it also takes time from the community. It kind of like puts the owners back onto the community, which also takes time again, which just feels a little bit unfair as well. But I think it's really the key to make those spaces successful, because as you say, Lisa, these spaces are now protected because those people were part of the process, and it's quite hard to get them in that process. We struggle with that on other projects. In Lynburn, it's just like exemplar, I feel. And it made our work much easier, and it makes the project much more successful. But you don't always have that fantastic network or those people in the background that kind of like create the nodal point between the people which are kind of like mistrusted and are sometimes also deserve to be mistrusted because we don't understand the communities correctly. But it's so critical to have that kind of connection and that partnership to make a project successful.
Thanks very much, Leanne. I think it's a good example of, in our experience at Surf, through the Surf Awards, having community anchors, people who are working within communities that know the community, that can act as that kind of link and find sort of local intelligence for delivering projects, but also actually reflecting on Kevin saying he's worked for Fife Council for 12 years, that longevity, and in other projects that we've looked at, having people in paid positions for a long time, knowing communities because of the length of time they've been somewhere, makes a difference to delivering something. A question for you, Lisa, from Don Brown. Have you been able to look at succession planning? Are there new volunteers coming in to keep it going and to share the load?
There are new volunteers coming in. At the moment, we've got a couple of young third-year boys working on the Duke of Edinburgh, and we've also got some people coming in with ourselves, working in conjunction with ourselves in the charity that operates out of the church. We're meant to be getting some young offenders in for them to do a programme of work across the church and across the garden as well, that they're going to be working towards some award. Volunteers are always, it's the whole thing with volunteering, you know, it has to fit in with people's lives. A lot of the people around Took, their lives are very chaotic. We do find that people help in different ways. So I mentioned about someone lending us their water, with another couple of, with a lot of people that like look out for the garden, but we could always be doing with more volunteers. Succession planning, we've built our board. We are needing more hands-on people that will do the garden. And I think what is trickier is trying to find people that will take on the real kind of hard graft of like doing the emails and, you know, all these meetings, presentations. That's more difficult. And to be honest, some of our volunteers wouldn't be able to do that.
Yeah, because I think you said you're a teacher.
Yeah, I was. Yeah.
Yeah, you were a teacher, and I was reflecting. You bring a set of skills, and I suppose that by coincidence we are about to have a student placement with us, and the research that she's looking at is on kind of charitable governance in community projects, because the skill sets that you need for the necessary governance, boring email management type stuff, requires a skill set that may not be wholly available within certain communities, as you've kind of reflected on the lives of the people that you're working with. But we know that more responsibility is kind of coming in a community direction. It delivers great outcomes, but nonetheless there are kind of tensions around that.
And I think a lot is getting put back onto volunteers, and I think a lot of this type of project are getting put back onto kind of charity organisations, third sector organisations, because the council don't have the capacity to do it. And I actually don't think, if we had been paid by the council, we'd been council workers, I don't think it would have been as successful. Now, that's not to say that the community haven't a good relationship with Kevin. I know that Marion came down and spent time at our open day, to go and lie down in a darkened room. She was going to do the tree adoptions, and she did enjoy it. It was nice for the local residents and for us to say, this is Marion, this is Marion and Leanne are designing this garden. You know, that was fantastic, for her to be able to do that. But it is, I do think a lot of stuff is getting put back onto volunteers, and there are an awful lot of gaps in expertise. I've never done anything like this before. You know, neither have any of the volunteers. We've got a volunteer that's struggling with alcoholism, that if he comes along, sometimes he's great, sometimes he's not, depending on his mental health and, you know, how under control his alcoholism is. You know, and that's the reality. Yeah, that's the reality. So we're trying our best with succession planning. It's a work in progress.
Yes, okay, but it's a pertinent question, and your reflections are totally realistic. But working communities is intense. But the fact that what you've touched on there is power dynamics that play out between communities, local authorities, and things like that are complicated. And there's unfortunately we can't copy exactly what happens in one place and make it happen in another, because the dynamics will always be different. But there's still a lot of lessons to be learned. Interestingly, Beth, one of Beth's comments is reducing bureaucracy would help facilitate community-led projects, and that my notes were that your challenges were all regulatory. They weren't some of the things that you imagined they would be. They were to do with things that you have to go through. That ultimately the same things that the private sector complains about often. And so I think that's sort of interesting. Your challenges with the planning system, with utilities and things like that. How we kind of get around that. Do you think would you like to see a lighter approach for community-led projects, particularly maybe in the sort of planning system, or do you think it just needs that you need support, except that there's additional support that's needed for that?
I think that that I don't think we could have done. I think we'd have really struggled to get planning permission through for the container without the help that we got from Paul. I don't think we could have done that. And the help that we got from BAM Construction. I mean, we've actually helped them though, because they came down and filmed. They interviewed us and filmed the garden, and we appeared at some big construction event where they talked about their community benefits. But it's been massive. We've had massive help from them. And yeah, the bureaucracy would have been overwhelming. And I think that bureaucracy has made it's been a huge challenge for us. And it would be better if it was lighter touch. I mean, even like the lease, the argument that we had with the lease, there's another community group. There's another community group up with 2 containers in a park at the other side of Dunfermline, and they're paying $500 a year.
Yeah,
they didn't argue back.
Your lease story was sounded really, really challenging.
It was months.
An internal thing within the local authority, which I'm imagining challenging. I don't know if Leanne, Kevin, or Calum, as people who work within regulatory systems fairly regularly, if you've got any comment on that about what this should mean for community sort of led projects.
Yeah, I mean, I can come in first. I mean, it's even challenging for us because, like you have to get planning permission, and well, a big challenge is trying to get money to improve places or work with communities. So I mean, the whole, I mean, I suppose I need to be careful what I say, but like the whole lease thing, I mean, I'm dealing with another community, and what really annoys me is the amount of community benefit this garden is having for saving the council, and then we get another department slapping like huge sums in it now, and so there's a big disjoint in councils, so like the estates service are treating it as like a commercial venture, like some car washing scheme going on or something, wanting to use the land and slapping sort of nearly commercial rates. But then the other point too is, I think the other thing with the community food growing, there's a whole thing about putting up the fences. I mean, it's not even community food growing. At play parks, people want fences up because of dogs, and so you get the amount of fences that go up to try and demarcate. So I think that, and then it's in another. I mean, it's not regulatory, but trying to get funding. I mean, I spent about 5 years trying to get funding for this, and then I was about to get 700,000, and then the funder just dismissed it at the 11th of hours. So I think there's challenges with that, and I think another thing is there isn't that many staff and councils to do this sort of work. I mean, I've been at this 12 years, and it's changed and it's evolved, and I mean, it's probably one of the best things I've worked on, and it's like it's not been a straight process. So I think there's a lot of challenges all around, and then maintenance is another challenge. I mean, you could have had this could have been a whole beautiful parkland, but we can't do that because there's nobody to maintain it. And so thankfully, Lisa's gone in. So I think there's a lot of challenges with trying to make places better. you know, and I think, you know, we've got statutory thing. I mean, again, the statutory thing with the river restoration was a nightmare. That took years to get done, because you've got flood risk management and, you know, calculations. So that was probably one of the hardest things.
Calum, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I love a bit of regulation myself. That's all it was. I feel that like many things, it needs to be proportionate. Like we need to be incentivizing the right kind of development. And well, I say development, I'm talking like an architect again, you know, you have to be incentivizing the right kind of thinking and progress. And on one hand, if projects were easier to do, then we would also see a lot of projects we don't want happening very easily. Just to put it into context, I've been down in London a bit through other things that I'm doing there, and find it staggering and quite shocking how many developments there are, say, for planning applications within Canary Wharf or new tower blocks. And I think I'm busy talking about how we should be regulating these things. Whereas in this case, yeah, free to fly. Let's, you know, allow more fluidity and things to happen without being so onerous. So it's like, how do you, it's like instead of a risk benefit analysis, it's a sort of regulation benefit analysis or something that we need to have.
Mm-hmm.
I think what struck us with this lease situation though, Calum, was that across different kind of green networks within Dunfermline, there's various kind of like little green projects and various things going on, both in Dunfermline and kind of the West Fife villages, and some people weren't getting charged for their area. Do you know? And then we were getting charged quite a lot, and there was no level playing field with it at all, and there still isn't. And we got in contact with our councillors, and our local councillor's suggestion was that we should apply for funding from the council to pay our lease bill from the council. And then eventually they would kick the can down the street and they'd sort it out at some point. Don't worry, you won't have to pay it, just get funding from the council, which we found ludicrous. I'll be honest. We found that absolutely ludicrous, that we would be looking to put a funding application for £1,200 into the council to then give the £1,200 back to the council, with nothing being sorted. Still complete discrepancy between what different community gardens are being charged. And this is you're talking about a very urban area. I mean, it's housing land. Mm-hmm. It's a very urban area. It's not some little community garden tucked away at the back of wherever.
I suppose the debate about the lease, I suppose, is an interesting one, because I suppose Surf are interested in the place principle, so the holistic approach to how we develop places and communities within places, which requires everyone to be around the table thinking about things. And what it sounds like is that the allotment manager is thinking about his budget and something specific. He's not thinking about the whole system, and partly because he's answerable for a bit of it, and you find that very often with council departments. They have their own budgets, they are responsible for very specific things, but it's helping them, and obviously it's been a bit tortuous. It's ended up in the right place through your work and your work, Kevin, but it's been a bit tortuous to get, and I suppose it will probably always have challenges within any system, particularly when it comes to finance. There will always be problems, but it's making it easier to kind of move past these problems so that you don't suddenly get slapped a bill for £1,200. But that also, the issue of it being equitable across one local authority is something that you would hope to see as well.
Yeah, we felt we were involved in council power struggles with it.
Yeah,
actually, with everyone operating in silos rather than partnership working.
It's 12:10, and so we're due to finish at 15:15. And the comments in the chat have primarily been to say how much people have appreciated the presentations and what we've seen arising from strategic plan, more detailed planning in a local area with your project, Calum, the council, sounding like an enabling local authority for the community to deliver things on. In the whole scheme of things, being enabling, without that, there may be some problems, but being enabling, having an enabling approach to it, and also some of the chat in the box about other good examples and thinking about who are we doing this for? Is it for us, the volunteers that are running this project, or is it for something wider? Which actually, Lisa, you've illustrated incredibly well. The fact that you were thinking very widely about who would use this garden and who you've involved in the participation of it. So a really enjoyable morning, Calum. It was your suggestion that we approached Leanne and Fife Council to talk about this, to hear your experience in this. So thank you very much for suggesting that. I'm grateful to you for bringing everyone to this wider attention. And I think this will be a useful event for people to see afterwards in the presentations as well, so that people can, I'm presuming people can contact you as well if they have any further questions or want to commission you for any future work within their local authorities. But on behalf of SURF and the audience, I'd like to thank all of our speakers. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And so it just leaves me now to sort of kind of wind up our morning. I think there are lessons there that are replicable in other parts of Scotland. And hopefully, if you're from a local authority, you found it a useful use of your time this morning. And I hope everyone has a good Easter weekend. And thank you for coming.